Welcome, everyone. So glad you're joining us for this wonderful conversation and presentation. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest today, David Spangler. David has been a spiritual teacher for over 50 years. He was co-director of the Findhorn Foundation, which is Europe's leading eco-spiritual center, and then co-founded the Lorien Association, based in Seattle, for which he teaches numerous classes. He is the author of many books, including Apprenticed to Spirit and Journey into Fire. So I'm very excited to be having a conversation with you, David. Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you, William. I'm excited too, and I am fine today. Thank you.
Right. Now, your work at the moment is primarily associated, in my mind anyway, with something that's called incarnational spirituality.
Yes.
Incarnational spirituality. Could you tell us what it is and how you got involved with it in the first place?
So, incarnational spirituality is it has its focus on the sacredness of incarnation itself, of the embodied state and our presence in the world. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but the way that I became involved really was in a two-step way, I guess. When I was 17, I was preparing to go to the university. I just graduated from high school. And a friend asked me what I was going to do. What did I want to do with my life? And I said, I want to be a molecular biologist. And I no sooner said that than I suddenly had this vision, and this subtle being appeared and said, actually, you're going to be involved with a spirituality of the incarnate state, a spirituality of being embodied and part of the earth. And I thought, well, that's fine, but that's something I'll do when I'm very much older and after I've been a successful molecular biologist.
Let me ask you a question immediately. You say this happened when you were 17.
It did.
So how come you took notice of this voice? Were you accustomed to having messages of this kind?
I was. I've been aware of the subtle dimension for as long as I can remember. Some of my earliest childhood memories are of connection with non-physical reality and with the energies that surround things in the world. I've always experienced everything in the world really as being alive in a non-organic sense. So having this being appear, it wasn't like it was a regular daily occurrence, but it was not something with which I was unfamiliar.
And was this just inside your psyche as a kind of intuitive sense, or something more substantial or real? Or real is the wrong word, I'm sorry, more substantial.
In this particular instance, it was an interior experience. It was like having my attention shifted away from my friend with whom I was talking, and suddenly I was having this interior vision. I was seeing I was seeing what looked like a department store mannequin, a kind of representation of an embodied person, and this image would morph. It would change into an image of a grail or a chalice, and then it would shift back to a person. And this happened 3 or 4 times, and then I was aware of a being standing next to me, and saying what I said, that, well, David, your future is going to be involved with a spirituality of the sacredness of incarnation.
And when you had this experience, which you trusted, so I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming there was a vibe, an atmosphere that was something you could trust, that was loving, it was...
Oh, absolutely. Yes, very much so.
When people are trying to discern whether or not they should listen to the messages they receive, there's a criterion sometimes applied, which is, check first of all whether it's loving or not loving.
Well, absolutely. Yes. So I had a very, very few experiences with running into non-loving energies, particularly around certain people whom I'd met or certain places. But for the most part, what I'd experienced as a child, and I grew up in a very loving atmosphere anyway with my parents, what I'd experienced when I had these encounters with the subtle dimension was a sense of benevolence and caring and compassion and also playfulness. Quite often, well, not quite often actually, always, sense of joy, a sense of just a deep sense of the wonder and delight of life itself. And if that wasn't present, I did not feel that, then I would be suspicious of what that was that I was tuning into. And also, like I said, it wasn't like I had this experience, and it wasn't like I then said, well, I'm now going to not go to the university. I'm going to go out and be a spiritual teacher. I'm going to do something different. I just thought, well, okay, that's information to put on the shelf. I really don't know what to do with that. So I'm just going to go ahead with the plans that I have, which in fact I did. But it was 3 years later when I had this really growing intuition that it was time for me to start a spiritual work.
What did that spiritual work look like? Because you were very young, weren't you? You're in your early 20s.
Yeah, I was 20. So at that time, my dad and mom had joined a metaphysical group in Phoenix, Arizona. We had moved there, and they joined this group for various reasons, and that was the first time that I actually encountered other people who were having clairvoyant experiences or psychic experiences of one kind or another. And it was also the first time I realized that that was not something that people did normally. I just thought these were experiences everybody had and just simply didn't talk about them. So in that point, I was 14. And so I'd been part of this community, not a community, a culture, groups in the Phoenix area that were studying metaphysics and UFOs and esoteric, and it was just the really very beginning edges of what later became known as the New Age movement.
How did that young man become a spiritual teacher and then go into evolutionary incarnational spirituality? How did that whole process happen?
One of the people whom we knew was a very famous psychic in those days named Neva Hunter. She was famous for doing trance channeling of past lives. She was kind of very similar to Edgar Cayce, and she traveled all around the country. She'd been an advertising executive, and then she developed this psychic ability and this ability to channel, and then that had become her work. And she traveled around the country giving readings and holding conferences. And her inner contact was a man named Dr. Gordon. And he said to her, uh, you need to do a conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and you need to have David Spangler as the keynote speaker. And she knew my parents, but she did not really know me. And I was, at that point, I was in college, and of course I knew her a bit, but she came to me, she contacted me, and she said, "David, I'm doing this conference, going to be on youth in the new age, and I'd like you to be the keynote speaker." And I said, "Sure." I thought there would be an adventure, so I was the token youth.
Had you ever given a talk before?
I had not on spiritual topics, but I had just given talks, in school. And I felt comfortable in doing it, but well, anyway, the long and the short of it was I prepared for this talk. I had just all these 3x5 cards that were my notes and everything, and I got up in front of this audience to give this talk, and I just shifted into an altered state of consciousness. Really, I just suddenly was over-lighted by a much larger version of myself, and a kind of collaborative or collective mind. I felt myself in touch with two or three other subtle colleagues, and I delivered this talk. I basically threw away my notes, and I delivered this talk entirely spontaneously, but it was about the changes in energy, changes going on in the subtle worlds as a consequence of this passing into the Aquarian age. And as a result of that talk, I was invited to come to Los Angeles and give a series of talks. And I, at the time, I said, well, I wouldn't be able to do that because I was at the university, but there was this growing pressure within me that I should do this. And then one day, and I kept saying no. There were a number of reasons for it. The Vietnam War was at its height, and my father was very, very concerned that I might be drafted, and I had scholarships. I had all these things that kept me in university and safe from the draft. And then one morning I woke up and I literally couldn't think. I couldn't remember. I would go to class and I would have absolutely no comprehension of what the teacher had said. I would read a textbook and close the covers, and I couldn't remember what I'd said or what I'd read. And I began failing in all my classes because I'd have these exams and I couldn't make out really what they were asking me to answer, much less know the answer. And this was stuff that I'd been getting straight A's on up till then. I mean, I get the message. It's time for me to leave the university. And as soon as I set that into motion, all that kind of loss of memory and everything disappeared. And so then I answered this invitation to come to Los Angeles and started doing a series of talks. And one thing led to another, and that's what I've done for the past 50 years.
You were forced into an altered state of consciousness over which you had no control.
I think part of me knew this was time. I needed to move on. This was time for me to start doing this work. And my personality was really resisting it. And so it's the only time in my life that I've had something like that happen. There was something stepped in, so to speak. And what didn't feel to me like it was an intrusion from outside. It felt like something in me said, okay, we're going to say no to continuing with the college experience. And you really do need to pay attention and make this step.
When you were giving your first talks, Did you know what you were going to say? Did you understand what was coming through? Was it part of your own wisdom, psyche, intuition speaking, or was it something different, bigger?
Well, I didn't always know ahead of time what I was going to say, but as soon as I stood up and began to talk, then I would know. I would have a sense of what it was I needed to say. What I needed to do, William, was I had to tune into the audience, and I had to tune into the field that the audience and I created together. And once I'd done that, then I knew what I needed to talk about. And I, the result of that is that I've always spoken extemporaneously. I've never been able to use notes because I just find that they interfere with that process, with tuning in and having a sense of what I need to say.
But let me ask you a question then, which I'm sure will intrigue everybody, which is, how do you tune in to your audience? What do you do?
Fundamentally, it's an act of love. I stand up in front of the group, the audience, and I quite consciously and deliberately look at them and just open my heart to them and just feel I am here to serve them. I am here because at a very deep level, there is love that unites us. It's just an act of mutual support and upliftment. And so I'm here really as the servant of the audience. I'm here as the servant of what wants to be a blessing for all of us in this occasion. And that creates the sense of resonance with the field of the audience.
That is very beautiful, and I wish every teacher would do that. I wish every teacher would do that. So listen, let's move us on now. Explain to us what incarnational spirituality is. What is it?
In the latter part of the last century, late 1990s, I was visited by a subtle being, one whom I had not had much contact with. When he came and said, and I'd been thinking, just about all the challenges that people were facing in the world and so on. And he came and he said, the challenge for humanity is not that you are too incarnated, it's that you're not incarnated enough. And then he left. And I thought, this is like one of those Zen koans. But I realized that he wasn't saying, well, you all have to get more physical, you're just not in the body enough. But he was referring to a deeper process, or a deeper state of being. And then I thought back to two things. One was an experience I'd had when I was 7 years old. And that was really, for me, the thing that, if I were to say what really got me on the track of this work, that was it. And in that experience, I was living in Morocco at the time. My dad and mom were in the military. And we were stationed on a base in Morocco. And I had this experience of going out of my body. The first time I'd had an out-of-the-body experience. And just uniting with my soul and feeling that presence of love, and then recapitulating the act of will and love that brought me into incarnation. I experienced the process of incarnating and the joy and the love that was sort of behind that. The love for the earth, the love for this world, and for becoming part of it. I remembered that, and then I remembered something that my very first, whom I would consider my first ongoing spiritual colleague and partner and mentor, being whom I called John, who appeared to me for the first time when I went to Los Angeles and started doing this lecturing. And he said, it's important to realize that you do not incarnate only into a body. The soul just doesn't step into a body the way a driver steps into an automobile. But you incarnate into a system. You incarnate into a pattern of relationships, some of which are with the body, some of which are with other physical and earthly elements, like your family and parents, but also just the general characteristics of the world. And others are more subtle. Some of what makes up that, what I call the incarnational system, are subtle forces. In any event, he said, when you think of incarnation, you need to think of being part of this system of connections and relationships, which extend both physically and non-physically into the material world and into the subtle world. So when I had this experience with this being who said we weren't incarnated enough, I went back in memory to both my experience of incarnating, but also to what John said. And I thought, well, I'm not sure what to do with this information, but I need to start exploring this and seeing what can we do to be more incarnated. I mean, I felt like, then of course I remembered what the vision I'd had when I was 17 about being involved with a spirituality of incarnation. And so I, putting all these pieces together and said, I need to find out or explore how we can be more incarnated as a whole system, not just simply be more in the body, although that's an important part of it as well, but as part of a whole system. I began teaching this and realized that a number of the people who came to my workshops and lectures were struggling with being embodied. Their spiritual teaching, you might say, or the information they had picked up over the years from various traditional religious sources or otherwise, was a need to get out of the body, out of the physical, out of the human, and into some transcendental realm. And years ago, John said, the problem is with the transcendental. You don't understand exactly what that is. And so you're always speaking generally of human beings. You tend to privilege the transcendental over the physical. You tend to privilege what you think is out there in the subtle world over what you are experiencing in the physical world, when in fact they're the same. They're one great wholeness, and you need to have honor and respect for both dimensions, for both sides. So I found in working with people that that I needed to address this issue of not honoring and not appreciating the spiritual dimension of their own incarnation and their own being, their own personalities, and the sense of really being in conflict within themselves, of trying to get away from parts of themselves, rather than seeing how can I deal with myself as a wholeness, recognizing that part of that wholeness extends out into the world and is part of my connectedness to the life around me. So incarnational spirituality deals with that whole process of discovering one's wholeness within the world and as a sacred being. And incarnation is not an exile from our true home. It's not a being sent away to some place where we'd rather not be.
Is this then the foundation out of which evolved what you call alliance space?
Yes, it, in a way, it is. It's definitely the foundation for it, yes. So I mentioned John, and when John first appeared to me, he actually showed up as what I called a Tweety professor. That is, he looked like somebody who was part of the faculty of a university, and he had on, this kind of traditional tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows. It was my stereotype of a professor. And in fact, some of my professors at university did in fact dress that way. So that was his initial presentation to me, except that he was a being of great energy and great love. And then he said, well, it's time to drop this, and I just will appear as I actually am, which was, as far as I could see, as this kind of sphere of light. And I needed to come into alignment with his energy and he with mine. This took about a month, actually, of meeting twice a day, in the morning and the afternoon. I would meditate, and we would come together, and our energy fields would begin to blend. And eventually, I realized we created a kind of third state. If you think of a Venn diagram, it's that area in the middle where two circles overlap, and there was a place where his energy and mine could meet in harmony and in synchronization without one overwhelming the other. So I didn't think much about that. It was a process that I learned in working with him. But in working with incarnational spirituality, there came a time when my subtle colleagues said, well, we'd like you to begin teaching how to be in contact with subtle partners. And the way to do that was, I felt, was through the creation of this overlapping synchronized field, which I called alliance space. And the reason I called it alliance space was because, for me, an alliance meant a partnership between two potentially unequal partners. Kind of like, today we have the alliance between the United States and the Ukraine. And yet, within the context of the alliance, both partners are equal. And John used to say, and in fact had me experience, coming into contact with energies of beings whose energy was much greater than my own, but recognizing that the commonality we shared was one of mutual sacredness. We were both, didn't matter what I was or what this being was, we were both part of the one. We were both part of sacredness, and we could come together through that link and find a place where our energies would not be mutually disruptive to the other. And so I call that alliance space. And yes, I teach classes on that.
It would be very appropriate now if you could advise us on how do we take ourselves into alliance space. Can you give us some hints or take us into an exercise that does that?
I can, actually. I can take you through the process. So first I want to say that alliance space is unique for every individual, because for each of us, our relationship with the subtle domain is going to be unique, just like it is with any relationship or any friendship or working partner that we have, partnership that we have. The way I might partner with somebody would be different than how you would or somebody else would. So it's important, I feel, to understand this individual aspect of it, that each person will experience this in his or her own way. So I'm not exactly, giving a recipe that you have to do this exactly this way, but here's how I would go about it. So the first step is to honor what I call stand in my own sovereignty, and this is honoring myself as a unique individual, as a unique physical embodied individual. because that's if I think of the connection with the subtle world as a kind of bridge between this dimension and another dimension, then each side of that bridge has to be anchored in its foundation to be strong and clear and supportive. And so this honoring of myself, my of my spirituality, of my sacredness, is giving honor and expression to the foundation that I'm creating in this moment. And it definitely depends, or I should say it is fostered and assisted by being able to love oneself. So it starts out, I would say, as a sense of opening my heart to myself and honoring this embodiment, this incarnation, recognizing that taking incarnation is an act of courage and love and intent on the part of the soul, shifting into this really strange and at times challenging dimension. And so I want to honor that my soul has taken that step. So now I'm emphasizing this because in workshop after workshop, I have found that one of the most challenging parts of this whole process is for people to love themselves, to honor themselves in a non-narcissistic fashion, but just in a way of saying, I am glad to be who I am. So one reason that is important is because what I'm going to encounter in alliance space or in encountering with another being is the strength of their identity. And if I'm not strong and clear in my own identity and my own boundaries, that could be overwhelming. It could lead to my losing a sense of myself in the presence of the other. And so I want to anchor in that. And the next thing is to extend that field of love out from myself to my immediate environment, the chair I'm sitting in, the room around me, because all these things are alive. They all possess subtle life, that is. They're all part of the one life, if I want to think of it that way. They all are part of sacredness. And so I'm attuning to my surroundings as an ally, as a partner. And this was something, again, that I learned from John. Times when I would struggle with holding his energy and not sort of bouncing off, or him bouncing off of me like a balloon. And he said, anchor yourself into your environment. You do that through love, and that will enhance your field. It will expand your field, like making a wider chalice or a broader base on which the chalice can rest. So the second step is this extending love and appreciation and honor into one's environment. And then the third step is one of expanding your sense of presence out into the space around you. That is, to have a sense of your body as being bigger than your body. And it's a proprioceptive sense. So it's a way of body mapping. It's the same process that we might use when we're, say, driving a car, and we just, after we've driven it for a while, it's like the car becomes an extension of our body, and we just instinctively know where the edges, the boundaries of that car are. We're moving through space. And that's the same process of using our proprioceptive sense of body mapping, except now we're mapping it out into this larger space and extending it into the subtle dimension. And I say to my students, hold hold the intent that you're expanding into the subtle dimension. And just be still and be sensitive to what you're experiencing as you expand your edges out. What is the felt sense of that experience? What is that like? And as they become familiar with that and comfortable with it, then the next step is I ask them to create, through their imagination, to create a dedicated space. It could be part of their field. It could be a bubble to one side. It could be like an oval in front of them. It could be whatever they're comfortable with. But it's a designated space that's built partly from their subtle energy and their will and intent, and eventually the energy of whatever partner they're inviting into this alliance. And I have them hold this sense of this space in their imagination and in this kind of proprioceptive field. And then I say, now what you want to fill this space with hospitality. You fill it with love. You fill it with a sense of hospitality, but you also fill it with intent. This is why this space is here. This is its purpose. This is the kind of alliance that I seek to create. This is the kind of ally that I'm asking for. And in terms of the feel of it, it's very similar. I use the metaphor of preparing your home to receive visitors. And these aren't just willy-nilly visitors. These are people whom you've invited, the kind of people you would like to come into your home. How would you prepare your home with the spirit of hospitality? But also, what is your intent in terms of whom you invite? And that's as far as they can go with alliance space. And because the other part of it, the other end of the bridge has to come out of the subtle realms. And so in my classes, people will do this and they may or may not initially feel any kind of contact. I don't encourage them to have a contact initially. I encourage them to focus on becoming comfortable and secure with the sense of this expanded space, with this alliance space. And then at a certain point when they feel ready, then I say, well, who would you like to invite? And that invitation is with a purpose. And the overarching theme is that there's a need in the world for us to create alliances that serve the world, that serve Gaia. Because there's so much that a subtle being that may wish to be helpful in our world can do, but there are limitations because it's not a physical being, so it can't affect the world in the way that we can. And there are things that we might like to do that are enhanced and made stronger through cooperation and collaboration with a subtle being. So in this sense, I see alliance space as a kind of force multiplier. It enhances my ability to act in the world, but it also enhances the ability of my subtle partner to contribute to the world as well. This isn't exactly going through an exercise, but I felt I needed to explain the steps to make them clear.
That's very profound and helpful, and I'm sure everybody would have followed it. What strikes me about it is the deep relational aspect of it, that the energy worker, the healer, the person with some psychic skills is not egocentric in the way that they reach out or do their work. They're very, very carefully, as you described it, pausing coming into the sovereignty. I'm repeating what you say now, coming into the sovereignty of their own physicality, their own constellation of energies, and then meeting in relationship, in equal relationship, the other beings that may be smaller or bigger.
Exactly. That's exactly right, William. You have put it so succinctly and clearly.
Well, I can only do that because you explained it so beautifully, and it's such a beautiful strategy for people to do this kind of work. Because I get concerned with people coming into energy work and psychic work who are kind of very, very human about it, as opposed to relational.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is very, very deep.
One thing that I've learned is that, we have what we call our special senses, with like sight and hearing, and to which there is a special organ. There's an actual organ that's dedicated to that sense. My eye, my ear, my olfactory senses in the nose, and so on. But then we have all these senses that are whole body based, like proprioception or our sense of balance, which on the actual sense is not located in a specific organ, but it's in the body as a whole. And that has been my understanding of the deeper nature of psychic senses, that if we're looking to replicate sight, sound as a psychic experience, and say, well, I need to see something or I need to hear something in the way that I do physically, and I'm actually limiting the range of possibilities, because I'm cutting out all this other full body awareness and full subtle body awareness that's possible. So when I work with my companions in my classes, I ask them to be aware of the fullness of the sense of their encounter with the subtle being. And the subtle being comes in the fullness of its presence, and it interacts with us along a wide spectrum of sensation or encounter or information, and not just narrowed into sight or hearing. Because I have people that say over and over, well, I don't see anything. Don't see anything. And yet, what you question them about what they're experiencing, they're actually experiencing, if they stop to think about it, a lot of information that's coming to them in non-physical ways or in subtle ways. So I think that sometimes we talk about psychic abilities, we narrow the range too much, and in the process deny what we're actually capable of.
Yes. I think what you're saying, if I can interpret it, is people need to be still and to trust the subtlety of their whole body impressions. There's one saying, isn't it, that God talks through feelings, not through words. But listen, David, we're coming to the end of this beautiful conversation. I found your description of the exercise very moving and useful, very practical and useful. So as we end this session, I would love it. We'd all love it if you'd give us a blessing to round off and close this particular session.
Thank you, William. I appreciate that invitation. So I often use, particularly if I'm starting inner work, what I call 4 blessings. They work equally well for ending, I guess. But here they are. Let us bless who we are. Bless the love and the will that brought us into being. It gave us this embodied identity. It is unique in the world, and no one else can bring its gifts to the world. So let us bless who we are. Let us bless those with whom we are in relationship. Let us bless those with whom we work. For together we create a field that none of us can create on our own, a collaborative field filled with promise and richness and power. So we bless those with whom we are engaged in work and in relationship, and for the field that we create together. And let us bless the place where we are. It holds us. It is part of our world. It is where we have our immediate impact, where our presence can make a difference. And its presence can make a difference for us. And so we bless the place where we are. And let us bless the work that we do. Let us bless the activity in which we are engaged. Let us bless our contribution, singly and together, to the wholeness of the world.
Blessed be, David.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, David Spangler, for your time and your participation in this wonderful conversation. It's much appreciated. Lots of love to you and gratitude.
And to you, my friend, and everyone watching.
Indeed.